Hi, friend, and welcome to this episode of Radiant Resilience. We are always looking for new guests on the podcast. I want to highlight you if you have a story of resilience that inspires others. Everyone has a story, and I believe that sharing yours can help others feel less alone. Are you ready to share your journey and inspire others? I want to hear from you. Every story has the power to impact lives and foster a supportive community. If you have a tale of overcoming adversity, personal growth, or a unique perspective on life's challenges, I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. To become a guest, please email us directly at radientresiliencepodcast@gmail.com or click the link in the show notes to become a guest. Join us in spreading hope, strength, and inspiration one story at a time. Be brave and share your story so others feel less alone. I hope to see you soon. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of anxiety and panic attacks, discussion of abandonment issues, family trauma, mention of suicidal thoughts, and mental health challenges. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I have a very special guest today, Leisha Thompson. She grew up in the Midwest and started right away in the hair industry at 18. She always enjoyed traveling and took a 6-month RV road trip back in 2017 with her husband that fueled her want for combining love of travel and hair that eventually led her to creating the business of the traveling hairstylist. So a year and a half ago, her husband and her turned her home into a rental, moved into an RV, and started this new business and is living out of an RV and traveling around and helping out hairstylists that want to take some leave, aka like me when I take my long vacations.
Yeah.
Although I haven't had her help me yet, but
Yeah.
it's on my radar that at some point I would like to. So,
Yes.
but welcome, Leisha. I met Leisha through our Stylist Soul Tribe group that we are in, and just big group of hairstylists that support each other,
Yeah.
business and personally. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today, I don't know the full story of, so it'll be for a first for me. But Leisha struggled a little bit with some anxiety that stemmed from an intense panic attack. So why don't you start with wherever you're comfortable, maybe leading into how that happened and some of the events that happened with that.
Yeah. So I actually think it's important to start with I was somebody who really never struggled with anxiety. Like I had friends who went through like heavy bouts of it that I witnessed in family, but I always thought I could empathize, but I couldn't completely ever understand it because I myself never really experienced it. I was very lucky to not have to deal with major anxiety like that. And so for me, I was someone who didn't start experiencing it until I was about 29. So it was like later on. And so a lot of what led up to it, I would say, is I have always been someone who was really good at bottling things up instead of diving into it.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I think was bottled up for me was just I struggle with some abandonment issues. My biological father chose not to be part of my life and was a drug addict and was in prison and was just a violent person. And there was a lot of that story that wasn't really shared with me growing up, and that always caused a rift with my family. And so I there was a lot of emotions and feelings and things like that that I knew were there, but I chose to not deal with for a very long
Mhm.
time. And just like with anything, when we start to just shove things in, eventually those come out. Eventually that is going to explode.
Yeah, they
And
eventually all come out in some shape or
mhm.
form.
Yeah, yeah. And there was just a 29 years of emotions there basically. And so as things were starting to come up that I felt like I was almost slowly losing control of is like the best way that I can put that. I also was dealing with a family member who was very suicidal, had recently been diagnosed with bipolar, and was just in a really depressive state. And so trying to manage that as well, while simultaneously a lot of things from like my childhood were being brought up. It was just like this honestly like storm, perfect storm that sort of led to me experiencing a pretty intense panic attack. And it was interesting because like I said at this point, I had never really experienced anything like this and I really didn't even know what was happening until it's, like, weird, even in the moment, I don't even think I was, like, realizing what was, like, completely happening to me because it lasted about 6 hours,
Oh,
and it
wow.
started yeah, it was really long, and it started at night, and it was actually when I was trying to go to bed, and which I think is actually I learned is can be common because it's once you start to settle and, like, your mind tries to settle, then it's, like, that come up, so I learned that actually can sometimes be a pretty common time that can happen. And it was just like all the things started happening at once. The feeling like you couldn't breathe, like my body trembling, feeling you're just like almost like gasping for breath and like your body is trying to like almost get out of itself in the weirdest way. But and so I just remember for hours just pacing my downstairs and then feeling like you get to this point where you just lose so much control. It was like it had completely taken over at that point and you almost feel like crazy, like, you're like, "I don't know what to do to stop it," so you just start, like I don't even know, like, I just it's really it's weird to talk about because you almost feel like I feel, like, a little bit of shame around it, not shame, but, like,
Oh.
maybe embarrassment because I just at that time did not know what was going on with me, and there was, like, so it really was just somebody just opened up, and it was just like, boom. And so I even just remember having moments like where I went outside, like no shoes on and walking down the street and just trying to sing songs aloud. I like if somebody drove by, they probably were like, what is going on with this
Oh.
chick here? But so it really was. It was like those are the I guess the gritty details of that night. And then I think it was almost 5, 6 in the morning before I finally was able to like come off of it and get a little bit of sleep. And I remember even waking up the next day and feeling like you were just in like a car accident. Like it was like my
Mm.
body was still like, what was going on? So that was that moment that I always say that night changed me. I was different leading up to that night,
Mm.
and I'm different since that night. And in a weird way, I think maybe I don't know, it probably could have happened in a in a better way, but I think it needed to happen because it really started to make me realize how much was going on at that time and how much I had really kind of pushed back and was not really dealing with. Um,
So, what kind of thoughts were going through your head during this panic attack? Were you having really dark thoughts? Were you, or was it more of a physical versus a mental reaction?
I think it almost was because I really don't remember what I was thinking in my head, and I don't know if it was just a little bit of that, like, PTSD where you're like, "What was I even" you almost blank in your head a little bit, so I like the similar feelings of PTSD, so I remember just feeling I'm like, "I need to, like, get out. I need to, like, move. I need to stop. I need to" and I think there was a lot of I was fearful. I was really fearful because I truly thought I was gonna see the next day or something, like, I thought it
Oh.
was really intense like that,
So, that's
but,
a lot of
so
dark
much of it was
feelings too.
yeah, yeah, I guess it is really, but I do remember it just being a lot more physical, it was just like my body could not I don't know, could not stabilize at all, and so I think it was mostly feeling like, "I need to stop this," but also the fear of, "What if I can't stop this?" was really what was going
Mm.
on through my mind most of that night.
Hi, everyone. It's Tawny from Radiant Resilience. I have some exciting news. I've been nominated for an award in the Women in Podcasting Awards under the category of Inspiration and Motivation. I'm so honored and I love your support. If you found any inspiration or motivation from this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to go online and vote for Radiant Resilient. Please visit the link in the show notes. Your vote means the world to me, and it helps us reach even more people who might need to hear these stories. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. I truly appreciate you. So how did you then determine that it was a panic attack? What clicked eventually that's what was happening?
So one of my friends that I had mentioned, I witnessed her go through a really tough bout of anxiety and having a couple of nights that of like similar-ish kind of things. And she was the first person I called. She was one of my best friends. And I was like telling her, I'm like, I don't even know what just happened. I feel like I was in a car accident. I had the scariest night I've ever had in my life and really talking it through her. And she said it pretty boldly. She's like, Leisha, you had a panic attack. That is anxiety. Like you are
Mm.
dealing with, and she obviously knew different things going on in my life. And so it's interesting that you almost still, even when you're in that moment, it's like you still don't want to face the thing that practically your body and your mind is trying to like shove in your face that you still can't see until somebody else is, oh no, you're dealing with this. Like this is what that was. And you need to probably find ways to cope with this and figure out what you need for yourself. So yeah, it really wasn't until she talking to her the next day until I was like, "Oh shit, I think this really was a panic attack and this is happening for a reason, so I need to figure out what I need to do." Because I will say after that night, I don't know, the anxiety for me is what was so intensified, more so after the night of the panic attack versus when it before. And it was intensified in such a weird way for me where I like, these are gonna be weird things, but I would even eat differently because I was so concerned with eating too fast or eating too big of bites because I was like, "What if my throat closes up all of a sudden?" Because these were the
Oh.
feelings that I had from that night. I had a really hard time sleeping for months after because
Oh.
I kept thinking that, like, when I hit the bed and I start to calm down, is this gonna happen again? So, sleep was really hard for me, and I almost had to, like, had to rearrange my room, like, sometimes sleep on a couch because it was just a weird place for me to be. So, like, just little things that, like, those were became daily thoughts of mine every day after because of just this one night that just, like I said, just really changed me and brought on so much anxiety for me in, like, the weirdest ways, but then also, like, ways that, really did make sense with just dealing with a lot of these feelings of like abandonment coming up and dealing with, like I said, managing and coping with someone who is suicidal in your family. And all of these things were happening at the same time, too, obviously.
And so you felt your body was probably feeling all of that crashing down at once, finally.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I really feel like that night changed me. And it took me a really long time to even be okay with a lot of things again. Yeah, I don't know, anxiety is a beast. I don't know, it is, and I'm still learning little things about it, but yeah, when you think you can just keep ignoring these things, anxiety is there to remind you, "No, you cannot. You need to
Uh,
here's what it is," thing. But yeah,
were you with your husband at the time?
I was,
Mhm.
and I he that's actually the night that he still feels really guilty about because
Oh.
he just didn't really know what was going on, and he was like, "We're he's the person that, like, he hits the pillow and he's out." I'm usually
Mine's the
not.
same way. My husband is the
Yeah.
same way. I'm always so
Uh-huh.
jealous. I'm like,
I
sometimes if
know,
my
me too.
brain is going, it takes me like an hour to fall
Mhm.
asleep. And I'm like, how do you just do that?
Oh, yeah. I'm the exact same way, and he's
Mhm.
like that too, like your husband. So he was, like, already asleep, and I remember waking him up and being like, "I don't know what's going on. I feel like I'm shaking. I'm scared, my whatever." And I think he was, like, trying to talk me through it, but I think he just truly didn't understand, and I don't think he even really understand how severe it was until the next day when I was, like, trying to reflect through the night and, like, telling him, "I didn't even know that you were outside for hours. I don't." So I think it was just really hard for him at the moment. And again, because I had never, this wasn't something that had happened before. I wasn't
Right.
even really a person who had dealt with major anxiety before. So I obviously empathize with him a lot because he didn't know and I didn't even know what to do.
Yeah.
I think he feels a little bit of guilt because he's like, I should have tried to help you. I didn't realize just how severe that was. And but yeah, he was there. My dog, I will say, pretty much was by my side the whole time. I think she
Oh,
probably instinctively knew something was up and was making
yeah.
sure that I was okay. But yeah, that those conversations definitely came later with my husband.
So talk a little bit, let's get a little specific on what you were feeling in that moment. So you
Hmm.
mentioned being a little bit hard to breathe. What, just for anybody out there who has never had something like that, so that if they do have something like that, maybe they'll be able to
Yeah.
recognize it. And I'm sure with every person, it's a different type of a reaction, but
Yeah, the very first thing that I think that came up was I noticed my heart was racing, which I thought was weird because I was literally trying to sleep. My eyes are closed, I'm winding down, and it was like racing so much I could feel it. Like even without my hand in my chest, I'm like, okay, what's going on with my heart, my chest? And then you almost start to get aware of that, and I think that almost it feeds into it a little bit, unfortunately.
yeah,
But so then I could feel like it moved into like heaviness on my chest. So then it was like I needed to like already sit up and then I had a lot of body trembles almost the whole time. And then I think it's just like the breathing. Your breathing starts to get a little like panicky, like you feel like you can't take a deep breath because then you still
mhm,
have this heaviness in your chest and things. And your mind just starts racing, but it's like you can't think of anything clearly, but your mind almost just goes into overdrive where it's you're just trying to figure out how to protect yourself, how to pull back, how to calm down. And at that time, I had never done therapy, I had never been through counseling, I had never done energy calls or Reiki. I'd never done anything like that. So I didn't have the tools to
mm,
know what I could pull out to work through. And so that's what's really different. Thereafter, there were other nights where I could like start to feel like, okay, my heart's racing a little bit. I feel a little shaky. I feel a little off right now. But I had gone through some things then where I had tools that I could be like, okay, let me go through some breathing exercises. Let me just play some soft music or just different things I could do. And that always did help pull me out. But at that time, like I said, when you don't if you've never had to look for those things, you don't feel like you know what to do and you're just
yeah,
panicking, literally panicking, and your body is going through that kind of panicky motion as well. So, yeah, and like I said, it's weird. Your skin feels like it wants to crawl off of you and but you want that feeling. So, I doing like jumping jacks, running, and weird things like that, it felt like little moments of relief, but still just not quite enough for me that night. But those were all the major things I think that really came up for me that night in the
yeah.
physical form.
So then after that, you said
Hmm.
that kind of brought on continuous anxiety for you.
Yeah.
So, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think it was something I thought about almost every day. It was, okay, what can I do today to not have this happen? That's like how I started my day. So it really became this forefront in my mind and just trying to do everything that I could to not, but there, like I said, there'd be little things like how I ate, how I'd sleep. It was I didn't feel like I was in a normal routine for probably a good 6 months. And I did start to seek out therapy because there were a lot of feelings that I just didn't know how to deal with. And so I'm like, if I don't know what to do, am I just leading myself to a cycle of what this anxiety is? And I don't
Yeah.
want this. I wanted to just be able to flip a switch and be like, okay, anxiety off. We're
Yeah.
gone. We did. That was just like my mentality around it. I'm like, no, I don't want to go through a process. I want it to be done now. I never want
Yeah.
to feel anxiety again, which is just not how it works. But so I did start seeking like therapy. I did start to even look into different energetic ways of it and just really honestly diving into my shit that I had built up for so long. And there were moments that were really hard that I even having conversations with my husband that I was considering, do I need to be on medication? I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You feel like you take a couple steps forward and then almost 3 steps back or 10 steps
Yeah.
back some days. So it was a lot of up and down, a lot of ebb and flows. I feel like at that point I did start to also be more open with people and just talking to people about what I was going through. And that actually really was extremely helpful. That was almost more helpful. Like therapy was helpful, but I think almost found more value and insight from just talking to people that had gone through something similar and how they dealt with it and what they were doing today. And because I was so shut off about so much stuff for so long that I was finally releasing some things that I probably did and
Hmm.
just being open about the whole process. And that was extremely helpful. It took time, but
For sure.
yeah.
How long ago was this happened?
So this was 2 years ago. So this
Okay.
really was not very long ago. It was in
Oh,
2022. Yeah. And I think it started, I would say that like around the holidays of 2021, I had a family member who attempted suicide and was unsuccessful. And that started to bring up, I would say in those next few months, it started bringing up just different things from my childhood that I was like, whoa, are we talking about this now? Kind of
oh
thing.
yeah.
And so that was going on for a few months. There was a diagnosis of bipolar kind of just before the attempt. And then it was March, April. It was like the end of March, beginning of April when the panic attack happened in 2022.
Okay,
So
so
like I
just a
said,
few months after that
yeah,
holiday. Hmm.
yeah. And then, like I said, I really feel like I didn't feel completely like I was finally hitting maybe like a benchmark with my anxiety journey until honestly probably more almost like the end of 2022. But I did also have a lot of things that were changing for me because that was also when I left Ohio,
Okay.
where I'm from. Um, so I guess in hindsight, some people could probably look at that and be like, "Oh, so were you just running for your problems?" And in a little sense, there is a little piece of me that I think was because that was my go-to for so long. But there were other things going on too that I was really excited about doing. But I do think for me, I needed to slightly remove myself a little bit from the situations going on for a time being, which has helped me to be able to come back and really talk out the things that I needed to
I think that's an
just last
important
year.
thing to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Just because you're having those reactions and stuff doesn't mean you have to
Hmm.
face that head on immediately, right? I think that even when I get in a fight with my husband, sometimes I need to walk away,
Hmm.
process all my thoughts, all the things outside of the initial immediate feelings, and
Yeah.
then we can go back and talk about it. And I think that's important. And did you leave was that when you were starting the traveling hairstyle?
Mhm.
Was that when you were
Yeah, it was.
traveling? Okay. Now,
It
I
was,
think it's
yeah.
also something very therapeutic. This is coming from somebody who travels a lot. There is something very
Yeah.
therapeutic about traveling, and maybe you needed that shakeup. Maybe you needed to be
Yeah.
able to then move into the processing process.
Yeah, it is interesting because for me, I definitely when I started to see an out with this new business I was creating, truthfully probably should have taken more time to build it up, but once I could see it, I was like, nope, we're doing this like as
I
soon
love
as
that.
possible because
Yeah.
I think I did need to remove a little bit because there was work that I needed to do on myself before I could show up and approach some of the core problems that were going on. And I was very aware of that. And that's what I was trying to do. I was like, I needed to first work through this thing at hand, which was the anxiety. And I took, some time to really seek out some ways to do that. And then it was almost like, okay, now that feel like I at least have some balance of this anxiety, some control over it, I need to now figure out my own self, like the things that I needed to be accountable and work through that, which I think was helpful for me to separate myself from that. So we had left. And that was really a journey too. And I think the beginnings of when we left and moved into an RV stripped me down in such a way that there was nothing left to hide for me. And I think in the grand scheme of things at the time, it was so freaking hard. Like honestly, all of last year was so hard transitioning into this new lifestyle, but also I think it did actually need to happen. There were things that I was still not peeling away that needed to be peeled away. And it was like I needed to remove myself from everything that was familiar to me
Yeah.
and almost break open this shell that I had really built so much over. So yeah, in a weird way, I do think that was good for me. Maybe that's not how everybody should approach that, But I do think removing myself and putting myself through a little bit of a different lifestyle was helpful for me to face some of that.
And I don't know about you, but for me, when I'm stuck and caught in the everydayness of work, of family, of all of the things that my normal everyday routine of being
Mm-hmm.
at home, it's so much easier for me to suppress stuff and ignore stuff and not address
Totally.
it. And I actually had,
Totally.
I realized that last year when we went to Guatemala. Last year, right before that, I had a failed embryo transfer a few months before that. And then I went through the holiday
Mm-hmm.
season and just that's our busiest time of year. So I was just working. And in my head, I thought I was processing. I'm like, oh, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm processing this. Things are happening. And then when we went to Guatemala and I actually shut all of that off and out, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have that to distract me anymore, I was like, oh, shit, I was not processing
Yeah.
this. And all the feelings came up at that point. So I don't know if you're
No, that's
like that.
exactly, yeah, that's exactly what I think I didn't know I needed. And it is, it's
Yeah.
so easy to just go on about your life. And that's how things get pushed aside. And that's what I was
Mhm.
doing for way too long. So
Mhm.
yeah, I totally understand that.
Or at the
Yeah.
end of the day, after the long work day or whatever, you don't have the energy to deal with it. Or on the
Hmm.
weekends, you just want to relax and not think about the hard stuff and not do the work. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I think that sometimes stepping away from that is an important thing to do, whether it's
Hmm.
temporarily or for a longer period of time or whatever it
Yeah.
is. It's easier to reflect back on it that way.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly because that I
So
think
I
that's
don't think you
what's
were
helped
running
me.
away from anything.
Yeah, I think if you were looking from the outside at a glance of it, some people could maybe think that. I don't know, but and in my head, there was a small part of me that was like, I'm running away from this. Like, but it's not totally like that, but in a way, I don't know, you could maybe think that, but I think it's like I said, what I needed at the time. Um, because abandonment is hard. And I know I skimmed over this, but I had my biological father was never, like I said, a part of my life. And my mom was in high school when she had me.
Wow.
My grandma was like my parent for the first few years of my life. And then my mom started to get on her feet. But I have memories of being not with my mom. I have memories of just being with my single mom. And I think the thing that made it tough with the kind of abandonment and why was a rift in my childhood growing up is that my mom, I think she did everything she needed to do at that point to because she didn't know either. She was still a
Yeah.
kid when she had me. But unfortunately, I think there was a broken foundation because there was so much that was not said, not brought up, held back, and there was never space created for me to ask questions. And a lot of the
Mm.
times I felt like I couldn't. And that was such a thing that really built up through my whole childhood with my mom because I didn't even know that I had other family members until I was in my 20s. I
Wow. What
didn't
do you
even
mean by
know
other family members, like
I had
extended
like half
family?
siblings. I
Oh,
had my most of my biological family lived only 20 miles away from me, and I didn't even know who any of them were. There was just a lot. And so I felt like in my 20s was the first time that I was like finding out things about even if you don't want to even though my biological father was rightfully not in my life because I think my life would have been very different had he
probably.
been,
Yeah.
but it still makes up my story. And
Yeah.
I think that's where there was that change of where my mom felt like it wasn't my story to ask, it was
Mm.
hers. And that was what always created a little bit of I think just a broken foundation. And maybe even just slightly distrust because there were things that I couldn't ask her, I couldn't talk to her about. When you're like 21 and getting a Facebook message from somebody that's, hey, I think I'm your sister, that's
Oh,
like a,
wow.
whoa, what? I don't
Uh,
even know what is going on right now. So there was just that was hard for me to feel like everybody around me knew more about me than I did, about where I came from and how the story was and what happened and how it happened. And so that was just, I think that was a lot of the feelings that I was really holding back because I felt like I couldn't talk to my
mm.
mom about it. And that's just,
Sure.
like that's hard. And I have memories of even being like 10 years old and being like, oh, I wonder if my real father is alive or dead. Or maybe you wonder, oh, do they like think about me? Or they like across the country? And like
Mm.
here that whole time, he was not far from me, in and out of prison, selling drugs. Like it's
Wow.
just, I think you start to build a different idea in your head when you don't know. And then when you start to realize that is not at all what it was, it is just hard to process that. And
Yeah.
so those were the things I think that really that I was pushing back for so long. And that was what I think started to lead into the anxiety, and then the current things going on with the family member is what just triggered the panic attack, I think, then for me. So yeah, I don't know. I don't
Oh.
even know why I went back to that, but
That's okay. That was a little bit more
yeah.
backstory to understand where it built up. And so then you mentioned
Hmm.
leaving and getting away from
Hmm.
it. And then you said you did go back and address the issues. So
Hmm.
after that, are you still struggling with the same anxiety issues, or did that kind of help lift the weight off your shoulders at all, or is it still the same?
I would say that there was a lot that I felt did get lifted for me because I obviously went back to my hometown, and I pretty much bluntly brought up things, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna have these conversations, and this is how I feel. And I think for the first time I was really honest about that, but I had taken a lot of time to really even digest what my feelings were. Like, what did I even want out of this? What were my feelings? I think for a while I didn't really know how to answer that. So I did, and I will say that it did put a lot of weight off of my shoulders for sure, but it didn't exactly go well. So that was unfortunate. I think I was hoping for more of a conversation, and it just there were a lot of ill feelings. It didn't exactly go well. It didn't
Mm,
really turn into the conversations that I'm hoping, and it has caused a major distance between my family and I now.
I'm
And
sorry.
yeah, it is hard. There are definitely like being a child that was abandoned, that is a hard thing. There's days that come up and being like, ugh, man, I don't love how that feels. But at the same time, I think there was something I needed that. There was so much that was so unsaid for so long that it was important for me to release what I needed to. And so I could feel like that shift of even though it didn't go well, I needed that for myself. And I think it was like now for me, like this was really only 6 months ago that happened, by the way.
Oh,
So this is
wow.
still very fresh. But I feel like now I'm in this stage where I am really trying to still continue this journey because I'm still very much in it, but also be in the place where I can just have peace with what it is and not let it define me. Because
Oh,
I
yeah.
definitely did that for a really long time. Like I let these traumas, these ill things, I let this be almost my identity for a while without saying
Mhm.
much, and which is yeah. But I think I'm now in a place where I'm like, I have so much in my life that I want to do and want to experience, and I've laid all my cards out on the table now. And so if my if the people around me want to come along with me with that, great. I would love that. If they don't, I have to be at peace with that, but I'm not going to let these things continue to kind of shadow and cloud over my life because it's
Ah,
just
yeah.
life is so short and it moves so fast.
So
And
true.
I don't know, I'm just stepping into that space of it now. So this is still a fresh space for me, but I would say that there has been a lot lifted off of my shoulders. I still have a lot to learn. I still
Yeah.
have rough days. We all do.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think I do think I'm definitely in so much of a better place now than what I was 2 years ago after that panic attack and the anxiety and working through some things. But yeah, I don't know. And I think that's I don't know. I just think it's important to say that yeah, I did do these things and it didn't go well because it isn't always unfortunately tidied up like that at the end.
Yeah.
And sometimes it has to go like that to be able to find the peace that you need. So I don't know. That's where it's at today, but
Yeah. And are you still dealing with the anxiety aspect then? Is it, has it changed? Has it gotten a little bit
yeah,
better? Yeah.
I would say it is definitely changed. It's definitely gotten better. I don't, there's so many like little things that I started doing for a while after that I don't anymore. But I also did just really start to look more at my health because I think I don't know, when you're 20s, you don't really, I don't know. You're like, I'm invincible. I can do whatever.
For
So I
sure.
did
Yeah.
start to actually be like, okay, maybe I should do a blood test and see where my levels are at. Maybe I need to
Yeah.
limit myself in a different way. Maybe I need to change my lifestyle a little bit. I've been actively doing that as well as really just trying to meditate and journal and actually let myself feel things rather than trying to bury it. And
Mhm.
it's been a slow process, but it's definitely gotten so much better now. And I know I brought this up a little bit, but like I did for a while consider if I needed to get on medication, and I never did. And I don't think it's anything that anybody should have shame around. I think everybody's story is really different.
Absolutely.
Um, but I don't know. There were a lot of moments I really did consider doing that as well. And thankfully, I just found other sources that helped me enough at that time to be like, okay, I feel like I'm like a tiny, teeny, tiny half step ahead today. I'm gonna just give it another day and give it another day and give it another day.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really all you can do is just literally take it little by little because and know that there might be some ebbs and flows. But yeah, I still definitely deal with it a little bit today. I won't lie. I think I took my time scheduling this podcast interview with you because I am really good at busying myself and sometimes
Mhm.
not reflecting back on those moments. And I was starting to do that when we started talking about doing this. And I noticed that I'm like, man, why does it make me feel a little anxious,
Yeah,
actually? And
yeah.
so I think I almost had to take a moment and be like, okay, why does this make me feel anxious? And I think it's
Mhm.
being vulnerable. And that's still
Yeah.
something I realized. And I'm like, okay, I'm still learning to be okay with being vulnerable. So it was even an interesting little reminder, just even coming to this podcast today that came up. So yeah, I definitely still have moments that
And you
happen.
mentioned having the shame around it too. So trying to
Hmm.
work through that and
Yeah.
realizing maybe that it's not a shameful thing. And there's a lot of people that deal with panic attacks and anxiety,
Yeah.
and a lot of people, I think probably more than we would ever know. And
Hmm.
that it's not something that should be shamed. We just need to recognize it and figure out how to work through it.
Yeah. No, it definitely I think everybody honestly deals with something to that degree at one point or another in their lives and I think that's where those are like other feelings that combat with me with just being afraid to maybe be vulnerable or not feel shameful around it is just that probably just the self-worth of that a little bit because then you start to
Mm.
think, "Oh, is this even worth like talking about?" You
Oh,
have those little voices in your head, but oh yeah, I'm definitely still a work in progress for
for
sure
sure.
on that. But yeah.
Mm. We all probably will be for forever to some degree.
Yeah, I know. It is always a journey. I'm definitely also realizing that too because I think I just thought in the beginning of this, I'm like, okay, a year from now, I'll look back and be like, oh, that happened, and now I'm fine. But
Yeah.
it's it is a building block, and it always is. Really, it's always a journey. And so I think even just being like getting to a place where you are okay with accepting that's how it is, and that is okay. Like that 6 years from now, I might still have a night where I feel a little okay. But I know at that point I have the tools, I have the resources, I've done the work, and it's okay. But it may never, I may never get to a day where I'm like, oh,
Mm.
I've never felt anxiety again. But
Yeah.
I think even just accepting that is, I had to even be okay with that, accepting that.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to share a little story with you that was, and you can give me your opinion. I haven't had anybody tell me it was a panic attack, but
Okay.
when your story was brought to my attention, it was because I shared my story with a
Mhm.
mutual friend that we have. But yeah, so we were camping actually, and I was in the
Mhm.
middle of a embryo transfer. I was in
Mhm.
the part of it where I was waiting. The 2 week wait is, I guess, what we call it.
Yeah.
Where I had done the embryo transfer, I was still doing all the meds and waiting for the day to come for me to do my blood test. And we were camping, and it was a middle of the night situation as well. It
Mhm.
was the day before we were leaving, and I just woke up and I just felt all of these very dark, scary feelings just
Mm.
crashing down on me. And it was like,
Yeah.
for me, it was more mental and emotional than it was physical, but it was just like, all the bad feel. Like I'm like, this didn't
Mm.
work. I am never going to be a mom. And what is my life going to look
Mhm.
like if I never become a mom? And although there's probably a lot of people out there that'll say that that's, oh, it's not that big of a deal, but it's when I
Oh.
pictured my whole life like that and I'd worked so hard and those were some of the other feelings and thoughts that were coming in
Mhm.
was like, I have busted my ass for this. And then if
Mhm.
it just doesn't happen and it doesn't happen and it doesn't happen. And it was this huge weight on me that I was just so sad, so upset,
Mhm.
so angry. And then we got up early in the morning. I barely slept. I was just like laying in the
Mhm.
tent, tossing and turning, super uncomfortable, brain going. The alarm goes off super early because we were in the Tetons in Wyoming.
Okay.
That's a pretty long drive back.
Mhm.
So we were going to get up really early, pack up the tent and everything. And I just was like, these feelings were not going away. And then we're
Mhm.
driving home. And at one point I was snippy with my husband because I was not
Mhm.
feeling myself. And then he finally was like, what is wrong? And I unloaded it all in the
Mhm.
car and I was bawling and I was crying. And those feelings and thoughts did not leave me
Mhm.
from the time they started in the middle of the night through that whole next day and maybe even mostly through the next day before I started feeling
Yeah.
normal again. And I am not a negative human being. I'm a very
Mhm.
positive, upbeat person. And so that was really scary for me. And I've never experienced anything like that. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know because I said I had two friends who went through really a lot of anxiety bouts as well. And the thing is, like, all three of our occurrences looked very different, and just like you're
Mm,
sharing with yours. So I think that is the thing that can be really interesting with anxiety and even just panic attacks is it does trigger this that certain spot of what you are currently going through, and it can exert itself differently, I think, with just whoever it is.
yeah.
So I think you definitely went through something like that. And it is almost like it is almost like your body's like holding in so much, and it is just like that release of, but it can still linger with you a little bit. And because that was the thing that I felt too. I'm like, this is not me. I'm not myself. I have no idea
Yes.
who this person, just where this person came from and why they replaced me in the middle of the night with,
Yeah.
I don't know. So I so understand that feeling of just, it's like an imposter to yourself, and it's hard to navigate that 100%.
And like you were
Yeah.
saying, it was the first time I'd ever experienced my fertility struggles have been hella hard. And
Hmm.
it's been for years and years, but that was the first time. And this was just last year. That was the first time that I had ever fully understood depression. I don't think I necessarily had suicidal thoughts, but I could
Yeah.
see where it could go that direction if you never pulled
Hmm.
yourself out of those feelings. I had never experienced anything like that before. I'd been sad before. I've experienced grief before for sure, but depression part of it is what I was really scared of. And I think similar to you in that regard too, afraid that that wasn't going to stop, that I wasn't going to be
Hmm.
able to pull out of it because it was like 2.5 days or something like that of
Yeah.
feeling that way. And then I don't remember what happened, to be honest with you, where I finally just felt like I was starting to feel back to normal again. But it was scary.
Yeah.
It was really scary.
So not that I'm like trying to understand, ask you questions, but I'm curious, did you talk to anybody else about that? Or did you like felt like you had enough knowledge at the time to know how you wanted to navigate that? Just out of curiosity. Or was it similar as me where it was like, I didn't know what happened, and it almost spurred that journey for me to be like, maybe I need to do more inner work or find things like that or
Yeah, I've been trying to do stuff through this whole
okay.
journey.
Yeah.
I've thought out a lot of energetic stuff. I've read a ton of books. I've been trying to work through that. So it didn't necessarily spark that, but I don't think I talked to anybody about it. I don't even think I've shared it with very
Mm,
many people, to be honest with you.
really?
So, yeah, and it just came up with me and Lisa when we were talking for her podcast when I was on it, and yeah, I don't know that I really shared it. And I've been working with Kristen Sosman, which is a lady that we know that does amazing energy work and stuff. And I don't know if I've even shared it with her, to be honest with you.
Really?
So, yeah, I
Interesting.
think and there were a lot of emotions going on at the time as well, not
Yeah.
just that feeling, but then I had to then go through that was a failed transfer. And then I had to go through another
Hmm.
one and like all the things. And I've never I haven't been in that dark place since then, but
Yeah.
I feel like I deal with grief related anxiety for sure.
Yeah.
And I do think that now, as I'm trying to navigate the stage of my fertility journey that I'm at, looking back to that reminds me how much I don't want to go back to that or
Mm.
be in that place
Yeah.
again. What do I need to do definitely moving forward to never do that again? Because it was scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have thoughts like that too. Even though I feel like I've come such a long way, there is a little like fear I think I'll probably always have to be like, what if it happens again and I feel like I can't control it or I can't work through it? And that does scare me a lot, but I really I don't know. I think having such a strong inner voice too is you have to build that up because that's at the end of the day that is what you're going to hear and that's what is present with you. And as much as like my husband now, I think is so supportive of my journey. I'm so thankful for him and I have so many more friends I get to share this with and like I've, sought out help. At the end of the day, it's still like that inner voice that I'm going to hear last. And so I think that's also something I try to be very intentional with is just like when I have those scary thoughts, then making sure I'm speaking myself and no, Leisha, you have what you need. It'll be okay. Even if you have these thoughts or feelings, you get to wake up the next day and start over or start fresh or whatever it needs to be. So it is scary though to think about, oh my gosh, what if all of this comes crashing down one night and I feel like I can't like manage but I think now I don't feel so alone in it and
Mm.
that helps. I know I have people that I can turn to or ask for help or seek advice and I don't know, but it's scary. It's so scary.
And there's triggers
Yeah.
too, right? So, like,
Yeah.
you were dealing with it in regards to family stuff, and
Mhm.
who's to say that that something isn't going to happen with you and
Mhm.
one of your family members or whatever that
Yeah.
is then going to trigger those feelings again. And I think that's where I was too, is
Mhm.
like with my fertility stuff, if I do that again, how many times am I going to go back into that place?
Mhm.
Really thinking about that stuff too, because you don't have any control over the triggers. They just happen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. And my trigger definitely is my family, which is hard
Hmm.
because you still want to be a part of your family,
Yeah, for sure.
but it is something I have to really navigate very carefully on because I have to still protect myself at the end of the day, but there are
Absolutely.
things that I still have to be a part of too, and I still want
Yeah.
to be a part of. So it's not, that is tough. And I think the triggers are something that I think really, yeah, like trying to understand those and then just knowing that like you have the choice to like shift from something if you need to just protect yourself for a moment. And I think that's why some people really decide to maybe even cut off certain things because it is such an intense trigger. And maybe for a while, some people need to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
That's so
I don't
hard with
know.
family though,
I
too,
know.
because you don't want to completely cut your family out of your life, but like you
Hmm.
also has it been like more navigating for you the correct boundaries to have in place that help mitigate some of that?
I think a little bit. So I still have a family member who is still working through a lot of their diagnosis of bipolar and still is very much suffering through
That's really tough.
some depression and suicidal thoughts. So that is still that's been, I think, a trigger and since the beginning, but it still is definitely there. There are some things that are better than what it used to be, but I think, I don't know, it is a little bit of boundaries. It is a little bit of just giving space when I feel like I need it for myself, but also with them. But I think there's space in the way of, I know that they're still working through some of their own things. And so
Hmm.
them not wanting to really communicate with me is hard for me because it
Hmm.
triggers this other thing of like abandonment,
Right.
which I think I've come a long way with that one. And so I think for me, I'm trying to turn that and just keep in mind that like this doesn't have to bring up this abandonment feeling. It doesn't have to define that. Maybe they just need space, and
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Like I have to be okay with that because there was moments when I needed space and had to work on that. So I don't know what the outcome of that is going to look like because it's still very much a thing to this day. I hope that there is a time where maybe we can come together and have whatever sort of I guess whatever sort of relationship that is there, but I'm also very aware too of I probably won't have normal relationships with my mom. I don't think that'll ever happen. I don't think I'll ever have a normal relationship with certain family members just because of the history of it. And I
Yeah.
think that it's almost, I don't know if I want to use the word safer, or it's almost, I guess, better for both of us in the long run if we are very aware of those boundaries and what they need to be. Yeah, I don't know. It is that's definitely still the space I'm like navigating now, but so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people out there with anxiety, and everybody's triggered by
Hmm.
different things, and everybody has to handle it in their own way. So, yeah, it's not fun.
No, it's a
Life is
heavy one.
hard.
It's so heavy. I know. I didn't, I don't know. It is, anxiety is tough because it does try to affect so many different parts of you.
Yeah.
And, but I also, there was somebody told me something once that I think was helpful in me just reframing what like a panic attack could be or an anxiety attack. And somebody told me that they're like, really, when our body goes into that mode, it's actually our body just trying to protect ourselves because we're
Hmm.
having such intense things happen. So they were like, think of it as a love attack, which I know kind of corny, but like I really do try to think about that statement so much with it. And I'm like, okay, this is just my body knows that it's going into this overdrive protection mode. I just need to remind myself that it's okay and we can calmly come off of that rather than go full in. It needs to take over. But I think any little thing you can take on like that to just reframe what anxiety can be like is so incredibly helpful. I've
Yeah.
had another person tell me too, because like I was saying, your inner thoughts are so important too, and like where your brain goes. And I had another friend tell me, she's like, when I notice that I'm having more negative inner talk or saying things to myself that I are not helpful to my anxiety, I will literally say it aloud in a Pee Wee Herman voice, or just think of any voice that is like goofy because it instantly takes you out of this anxiety moment. And laughing is such a release in such a healthy way. And
Yeah.
so even like little things like that, like maybe it's not Pee Wee Herman, maybe I don't know, maybe it's somebody else, but I really like any little tool that I've taken from somebody, I really take that to heart. And because it's helped me so many different
Hmm.
times. And no matter how silly it might sound, or I don't know,
Yeah.
but yeah, those are
So
important to have.
I'm curious, do your anxiety, okay, so you had the panic attack, but
Hmm.
that's different from the anxiety that you're experiencing now.
Yeah.
So what happens to you when you are experiencing the anxiety now? Is that a physical response? Is it similar to the panic attack? Is it different? Talk through that.
I think that's actually a good thing that you just brought up because for me, like I had that main panic attack. I had two other nights where I think I had almost like mini panic attacks,
Okay.
but I dealt with those differently. And those all I think really did happen so much more physically. Whereas like when I've had anxiety, that is something that I think comes more mentally. Like I
Okay.
start and I can almost notice when I'm falling into that because it's like how I start thinking about something, or I think almost something irrational. And then you start having these like thoughts where you're like, why am I thinking that? And then I think sometimes it'll trigger like your heart to race or something
Yeah.
physical to go with it, where that's like when I have a physical thing happen from my thoughts, then that's when I'm okay, I need to really just reset here because this is, I think, what starts to lead me into almost a panic attack. Yeah, I think that is for me, it's almost like anxiety really happens more in mentally for me. And the panic attack is basically a full-on physical attack, really.
That's so
So,
interesting because I am very non-confrontational.
yeah.
And confrontation, that gives me more anxiety than like
Mm,
almost anything I've ever experienced. So if I'm,
yeah.
and I'm trying to get better at asserting myself and speaking my truth
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. But a lot of the times in my brain, I'm thinking this person's going to get upset with me and they're never going to talk to me
Mm-hmm.
again when I'm trying to confront something. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not somebody that's going to come at you aggressively upset unless
Mm-hmm.
it's like in the moment. Maybe with my husband in our fights, sometimes I'll do that.
Yeah.
If it's like a friend or if it's a relative or whatever, I have the very physical response to that. So it's funny because
Interesting.
my little incident last year was more of a mental and emotional, but
Mm-hmm.
I will have very frequently, if I am worried about upsetting somebody, it turns physical. And it's that, like you're talking about, my heart starts racing. I
Mm-hmm.
start sweating And then
Yeah,
I
yeah.
almost start shivering. Like, I'm like, dude,
Mhm.
I'm not cold
Like
right now, but
trembling,
I'm like
yeah.
shaking. Right. But
Mhm.
yeah, so for me, those are very physical. So it's really interesting
Mm.
to just compare the different ways that it shows
Yeah.
up for people.
Yeah, because I think I also definitely like my anxiety probably almost has a little segment of like social anxiety because I definitely get so in my head about meeting new people or if I said something, I am literally that person that is like, "Oh my God, I said that like weird thing in 2018 at that one party." And then it's you start just I don't even know snowballing into this
Yeah.
weird thing where you're like, "Why did this one thing just affect this whole thing?" I definitely I think I think I've actually always dealt with a little bit of in social anxiety, but I didn't know it was anxiety until
Oh,
I started
interesting.
experiencing, I don't know, more triggered anxiety. Because there is,
Yeah.
I think, different levels of it for sure. Because I've always been very nervous around what I say or confrontation. I definitely have never been comfortable with that as well, which is so much of why I bottle so much up with like my family because it was
Yeah.
confrontational. So it is interesting because I do think there's these like pockets of anxiety that can be really just different for people. And I think for me, I do definitely have a pocket of social anxiety. And then my other anxiety is like, I don't know, just more triggered anxiety, like triggered to whatever traumas or thoughts you are coming up for you. So it is almost two different, I don't know, like things that happen, which is interesting. So it is interesting to think like that it might be a little bit different too for everybody and what that looks like.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll have those, like I'll be at the salon or something and I'll start like sweating, but I'm like shaking, but I don't even, it's not
Mhm.
even confrontation related or whatever. And I've been trying
Mm.
to, I didn't recognize that was more of an anxiety, maybe
Yeah.
attack, but I'm like I feel like it's more mild than that, but like an anxiety
Mhm.
response to
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
I've been trying to pay more attention to what's triggering that and what's bringing that on
Mhm.
and becoming more aware of it just so I can, but
Mhm.
I still don't know how to like mitigate it, how to get the like sweats and the shakes to stop other
Mhm.
than like breathing through it and trying to just like
Yeah.
calm myself down and maybe being by myself for a little bit too.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that is something that's like the process that I think takes so much time for people because it is I don't know. Like I still am I think I have a pretty good understanding of my journey and my anxiety, but there are still days where I will feel anxious and I am like, I don't know, I can't pinpoint exactly what brought this up today. All I can do is work through it, but I can't pinpoint why this physical response came up or why this like why I had this thought about things. And so I do think there are days where we're not always probably going to have the answers, but
Yeah.
yeah, and that's what I think that's what makes it tough. And for me as someone who I think I can be a little bit of a control freak. I want to know. I want to know how it started, why, what happens, what do I do to combat it, and how do I never I want all the answers. That's just my
Yeah.
personality. And so it's I that is something I really have to know that Alicia, you may not always know the answers every single day, and that's okay, but it can be frustrating, but it doesn't change anything that you've gotten to this point. But it's like you almost have to keep this mental checklist of, okay, what did I like do differently this day to what was said in that moment, just like you were saying, to start to trigger this response, and what in that felt like it helped me the most to like work through it. So it is such a fine tuning constantly of that because then it could change too. But I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting stuff though.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's funny. You're talking about being in control and stuff. I
Mhm.
recently used the analogy to my husband of like if a car's broken,
Mhm.
in order to fix it, you have to know what's wrong with it. So,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
otherwise you can't fix it. That's really
Mm.
how my brain works too. Oh, geez.
Yeah. Oh
Well,
yeah.
yeah, thank you so much. Do you have any parting words about anxiety, panic attacks, or what people could do? What final parting words would you have for people listening?
Okay. I think we both actually talked about some really good things I think that could turn into good tips for people, but I think just another reminder of you don't ever have to feel alone with it is the biggest thing that I think helps me today is don't be afraid to be to speak it out because we all have like I share details in my panic attack that I've never publicly shared and really never shared to anybody besides my husband about specifics of that night. And I did that because it's like anxiety can look really freaking ugly and it's not always pretty and it's hard. And but I think it's important to share that because that's like the reality of it for so many people.
Yeah.
That is what that can look like. And so I think hopefully that is something to just remind somebody who might be struggling with it is that you're not alone in that. And unfortunately, it can look ugly some nights, but there are so many resources that you can find. There's people out there that care, and you just have to be open and sharing those things because the other side of it is just so good to get to when you feel like you can openly share that and also just release that and know where you came from that point. So it's the growth in that is so important. So I don't know. I think that's probably what I'll leave it on.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And thank you so much for coming on here and sharing that story, even though you were anxious about
Yeah.
it. And
I know.
but
I
I
know.
really
Isn't that
appreciate
ironic?
it.
No.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I get stage fright sometimes too,
Yeah.
but thank you
No,
so
I
much for,
appreciate, yeah, I just appreciate you even being willing to talk about this or having me on. I love what you're doing
yeah,
with this podcast. I think it's so,
thank
so, so
you.
important. So, yeah,
Thank
I appreciate
you.
you.
It means a lot. Thank you so much. And then I don't take your vulnerability lightly. So I really, truly appreciate everyone that has come on here and shared what they've shared because it's not an easy thing to do to
Mhm.
share it, be vulnerable, relive some of that. It's really hard. So thank you so much for that. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it. So.
thank you. I appreciate it too.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this amazing episode. Hopefully, y'all found some help in anxiety and panic attacks and anything else you're dealing with, maybe some family stuff too. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.